I've been wanting to make this video for quite a while now, but I was hesitant to do so. There's so much to cover about mechanical keyboards, and I questioned myself whether or not I was even qualified to talk about this. So instead, I decided to create a couple videos about specific topics of mechanical keyboards instead of a broad video. And they have been doing pretty well. Thank you so much if you have watched my other videos and have subscribed to the channel. In this video, I'll be telling you what you need to know to get started with custom mechanical keyboards. I necessarily won't be telling you everything that you need to know in this video, or else that would be a very long video, but I will link out to other videos on YouTube that you can watch that talks about specific parts that I will mention. First off, I want to say that building your own mechanical keyboard will not be cheaper than just buying a pre-built keyboard on Amazon or some other vendor. This can be a very expensive hobby, and if you're wondering why people even do this, spend lots of money on keyboards that they can buy for like $100 instead of building one for like $400, you should watch these Teha type videos about why people are into this hobby. Now, how can you buy a custom mechanical keyboard? There are two main ways for buying custom mechanical keyboards: buying them as in-stock parts or joining group buys. I have another video where you can buy in-stock mechanical keyboard parts, and I apologize that the audio in that video isn't great and the exposure is all messed up, but that video has links to a bunch of parts that you can buy. In the description of this video, I'll be linking some vendors that you can buy from rather than individual parts. Let's talk about group buys. You can think of group buys as like a pre-order or a Kickstarter. Someone has an idea for a keyboard or keyboard parts. They gather money from interested people. They use the money to pay manufacturers to create the product, and then the product is shipped to you when it's done. You can find out about group buys on websites such as geekhack.org or the subreddit mech group buys. Note that all group buys inherently have some risks since you're paying for a product that's not actually out yet. So for example, the product can be delayed due to manufacturing defects or just because of COVID related things, or the product didn't turn out exactly as planned. Either way, if you choose to go the in-stock route or the group buy route, you'll be waiting months for your keyboard parts most likely. For in-stock parts, you'll have to wait for parts to become restocked, and there are some parts that go out of stock in minutes. With group buys, you're gonna have to wait for the product to actually be created and then shipped to you. The popularity of mechanical keyboards have greatly outgrown the capacity of vendors, and this hobby is a lot of waiting. Mechanical keyboards come in a bunch of sizes. Some sizes include 40%, 60%, 65%, 75%, 10 keyless, 1800, and full size. I won't be covering the sizes in this video, but you can watch this video to have a better idea of all the different sizes that are available. And with all these sizes that are available, there are even variations in layouts. I won't cover all the variations because that would be just way too much, but I'll cover 60% because that's the most popular layout for mechanical keyboards right now. Okay, so taking a look at this image, very quickly, let's talk about keycap sizes. So these keycaps here, the smallest one, these are 1U sizes or 1 unit. A standard backspace is 2U in size or 2 unit. A standard spacebar is 6.25 U's, caps lock is 1.75, right shift is 2.75, and so on. So this top layout here is a standard 60% layout. If you look at the one below it, there's some variations here. So for example, the backspace is now 2 1U's instead of 1 2U keycap. This is a split backspace. And the reason why some people like having a split backspace is so they can have an extra key on their smaller form factor keyboard. You also notice that this right shift here, this is actually marked incorrect. This is a 1.75 shift, and this is a 1 unit next to it. So if you want a shorter right shift in order to squeeze in another switch, you can do that there. And then you notice that even on the bottom row here, the space bar is a 7U space bar, so it's larger than the one above it. And there's also 1.5 modifiers on the bottom with a 1U modifier squished between them. And you can have other variations too, such as if we look at this one here, this is a 6U spacebar layout. This is pretty uncommon. You probably won't see this very often. And this is another 6.25 bottom row layout here. Not every 60% keyboard will cover these layouts. They may cover more or they may cover less. This really depends on the PCB that you buy and the plate that supports it and or the 60% kit. And choosing between these variation of a 60% layout will really just come down to personal preference. Some other things that you might run into is WKL or Win keyless. This is a 60% board that does not have a Windows key. So you can see that in the case itself, there's actually a metal blocker here. And to the left and right of the blocker is a 1.5 modifier. And this spacebar here is a 7U spacebar. So generally a 60% keyboard that's a Win keyless layout, WKL, it'll be a 7U spacebar with a 1.5 U modifiers on the bottom. Another variation you might run into is HHKB. So you can see here on the right in HHKB layout, there's no modifiers on the bottom left or right. And the reason why it's called HHKB is because of this Happy Hacking keyboard. This is a Japanese keyboard. It essentially borrows that layout and uses it for other 60%. I won't be going over how to build a keyboard, but this video is a great starting point. Note that your build can vary depending on your parts. Alright, let's talk about parts, starting with cases. Cases can come in all sorts of different sizes, so make sure to select the case that corresponds to your PCB and plate. They can also come in all sorts of different materials, such as aluminum or some kind of plastic like acrylic or polycarbonate. 60% is the most common and standardized layout. So if you're looking to buy a case separate from your plate or PCB, there's a good chance that you'll be building a 60% board. However, not all 60% parts will necessarily work together, so do your research. You can watch my video about in-stock keyboard parts for a list of 60% parts that will work together. For all the other sizes such as 65% or 10 keyless, people are mostly buying kits which will come with a plate and PCB along with the case. Next, let's talk about plates. Plates sit between your PCB and your switches. If you're buying a plate and PCB separately, make sure that the plate fits the layout supported by your PCB. There are a bunch of different plate materials that will affect your typing experience and the acoustics of your keyboard. I'm planning on doing an in-depth video about keyboard plates and keyboard construction in the future, but 3 common materials that you'll run into for plates are aluminum, brass, and polycarbonate. If you want a higher pitch, crispy typing sound with a rigid typing experience, go with a brass plate. If you're looking for a lower pitch, thocky typing sound with a more flexy typing experience, go with a polycarbonate plate. Aluminum is a great middle ground and safe option for your keyboard plates. The PCB is the brain of your keyboard. This is where your switches go into. Pretend that there's a plate here. Your PCB will most likely have these 2 extra holes on the side for PCB mounted switches, which I will cover after I'm done talking about PCBs. A PCB can either be hot swap or solderable. A hot swap PCB is great for beginners because it makes it really easy to build a keyboard. Instead of soldering the switches into your PCB, you can easily just plop in a switch and then plop it out whenever you want to try out a different switch. Soldering can seem intimidating, but there's a bunch of resources online for you to watch to learn how to solder. You can get a nice soldering iron for about $100, but through-hole components are really forgiving, so I've been using this $40 Weller soldering station for all of my keyboards, and it has worked fine. This unit comes with a chisel tip, but if you ever need to replace a tip, make sure you buy a chisel tip instead of a pointy cone tip. As for the solder, I use this Kessler 6737.031 inch solder. The PCB that you have will most likely support QMK, which is an open source keyboard firmware. This makes it so your keyboard is fully programmable, meaning you can change every key to be whatever you want. There are a bunch of resources about QMK that you can watch on YouTube to learn more. Switches fall under 3 different buckets: linear, tactile, and clicky. With linear switches, you feel no bump as you push the switch down. With a tactile switch, you would feel a bump before reaching the very bottom. And with a clicky switch, you would both feel a bump and hear a loud audible click. And every switch has a spring weight. which is usually measured in bottom out force. Bottom out meaning how much force it takes to fully push a switch down. Different switches will have different weights. One specific switch may even come in different weights. For example, the C3 tangerines can either come in 62 grams or 67 grams. Just for reference, a cherry red and cherry brown has a bottom out force of 60 grams. Cherry blues have a bottom out force of 65 grams. But with cherry and Gateron switches, you may see the actuation force listed instead of the bottom out force. The actuation force is how much force it takes for the switch to register a key press. But pretty much all the other switches that you'll find go by bottom out force. For me, I prefer 65 grams or 67 grams. 62 grams is a bit too light for me, and 70 grams is a bit too heavy. If you want, you can even buy replacement springs if you want a different weight or a higher quality spring. TX springs are some of the best aftermarket springs. A switch can either be PCB mounted or plate mounted. PPC mounted switches have these two little plastic legs on the bottom that goes into the PCB for stability. Most switches that you'll buy are PCB mounted. If you need a plate mounted switch because your PCB does not have the holes necessary for a PCB mounted switch, such as the drop control or alt keyboard, you can clip these little plastic legs off with flush cutters. Of course, you can still use a plate mount switch on a PCB that supports PCB mounted switches. You just won't be using the two extra holes. Make sure you actually use a plate, however. To figure out what kind of switches you like, you can either buy a switch tester like this or even a really big one, but you'll never know exactly how it feels to type on it if it's not on an actual keyboard. These days, there are a boatload of switches to choose from, but here are some linear, tactile, and clicky switches that I hear good things about. Note that switches are highly subjective. For linears, there are the Gateron yellows, alpacas, mauve, Novel Keys creams, C3 tangerines, and Gateron inks. For tactile, there are the T1s, lilacs, Otemu sky, box royal, burnt oranges, holy pandas, Zelios, and these aren't out yet, but I'm looking forward to the upcoming C3 kiwi switches. For clicky, there are the box jade or navies. There's the box white, the novel key sherbet, and there's also the upcoming C3 blackberry switch. Next up are stabilizers or stabs. These things are used to stabilize keys on your keyboard that are 2 U's or longer, such as the backspace, right shift, left shift, and spacebar. You'll need either a plate mounted stab or a PCB mounted stab. With a PCB mounted stabilizer, your PCB needs to have the holes necessary for the stabilizers to go into the PCB, and this will be the case most of the time. Make sure to get screw-in stabs, not snap-ins or clip-in stabs, just to ensure that the stabs won't pop out. With plate-mounted stabs, just like the name implies, the stabilizer is mounted on the plate rather than the PCB. There are not a lot of keyboards out there that take only plate-mounted stabs, but some of the popular keyboards are the Drop Control or Alt and the NK65s. But most of the time, you're going to need to get PCB mounted stabilizers. If you need plate mounted stabilizers, your only option are the cherry ones, and you can buy these off Novel Keys. For PCB mounted stabilizers, I recommend the Durox stabilizers, and there are a few vendors who carry these. You will either need a 6.25 or 7U stabilizer for your spacebar, and a 2U stabilizer for all the other keys on your keyboard. If you want to be extra safe, you can get these M2 non-metal washers for your screw-in stabilizers to prevent any shorting, but you'll most likely won't need it. Most of my keyboards are built without washers and they're just fine. I have an in-depth video about keycap sets that I'll link in the description, and I really encourage you to watch that video. In that video, I cover everything you need to know about keycap group buys, sizes, profiles, materials, and so on. But in this video, I'll just tell you about some places that you can buy in-stock keycap sets, meaning not from group buys. KBD Fans is a fan favorite for everything keyboard related, but they also have a bunch of keycap sets that you can buy. It's just that they ship from China, so it might take a little bit for it to get to you. Novel Keys is a very popular US-based vendor, and they started to stock some keycap sets. However, a lot of them are out of stock right now, so I'm not sure if or when they will become back in stock. But some popular sets they have sold are these vaporware style keycap set here, There's also this simple black on white keycap set. OSA sleeves. This one's actually still in stock, actually. There's also this other black on white keycap set in a different profile. Sometimes Drop has keycap sets that are in stock, but a lot of the sets right now are actually just on pre-order. Mel Geek has some keycap sets in a very unpopular profile, MDA, if you want to give that a shot. And lastly, Amazon has some keycap sets, but it's pretty limited here. You will most likely have a USB-C connection on your PCB, so you can use any USB-C cable that supports data transfer. But if you want a more fancier cable, because come on, we're spending a bunch of money on nice looking keyboards here, Asceni, which you can find on Amazon, sell these pretty nice double sleeve USB cables that come with a detachable end so that you can either use a USB connection or a less common USB mini connection for your keyboard. If you really want to go all out, you can either buy parts from a vendor to make your own cable, or you can just pay the vendor to make the cable for you. I'll link some cable vendors in the description below, or in the sticky comment if I run out of room in the description. Lastly, I want to talk about lube. This is technically not needed, but if you're going to spend the time and money to build a custom mechanical keyboard, I highly recommend lubing your switches and your stabilizers. Lubing your switches will make them feel really smooth, and lubing your stabilizers will get rid of the awful noise that comes with them. However, if you're going to use clicky switches, I highly recommend not lubing them. You can lube the springs if you want. The three most popular lube choices that you'll run into are 3203, 3204, and Crytox 205G0 or grade 0. 3203 will be the thinnest, and 205G0 will be the thickest. If you have never lubed before, I highly recommend not using 205G0 on your switches. While it will make your switches feel the most smooth, it's the most difficult to apply correctly. It can be really easy to overlube your switches, and they won't feel great when you do so. For tactile switches, I like to use 3203. Since it's the thinnest lube, it will retain the most tactility while adding some smoothness. And for linear switches, I really like using 205G0 because it makes them feel so much better. But as I said before, it can be really easy to overlube your switch with 205G0s. I won't show you how to lube your switches in this video, but I'll link some resources below in the description on how to do so. If you want to lube your spring to get rid of any pinging or crunching noises when you're typing, I like to use this Victorinox multi-tool oil. It's only $6 and you get a lot of it. And the way that I like to lube springs is that I put them all in a plastic bag. I'll put some drops of oil in and I'll shake the bag around. While this wastes some oil because you're getting oil all over the bag and stuff, it's only $6 for this and you can lube a lot of springs with this much oil. For stabilizers, I use dielectric grease and 205G0. I use the dielectric grease on the wires on the stabilizers, and this is really thick. And I use 205G0 on the plastic parts on the stabilizers. All right, let's go over some useful websites. Geekhack.org is the oldest keyboard community around, and I mostly go here to look at interest checks and group buys. Keyboard University is a great place for beginners to learn about mechanical keyboards in a written format. So, for example, they have articles on keycaps, keyboard size and layout, stabilizers, switches, and so on. The subreddit Mechanical Keyboards is a great place to go if you want to mostly just look at pictures of keyboards and memes. However, the wiki on the subreddit has a lot of great information. A decent amount of it is outdated, but there's still a lot of good stuff in here that you can learn from. The subreddit Mech Market is a place to go if you're looking to buy mechanical keyboards or parts from other Redditors. The subreddit Mech Group Buys is a great place to go if you want to find out about group buys in the more visual format versus Geekhack, where it's all just a bunch of words. But there's also the website mechgroupbuys.com if you want to find out about group buys as well. Hey, Jimmy in Post here. Types just put out a video where he goes more into depth about some mechanical keyboard forums mentioned in this video and the current state of information infrastructure in the community. I encourage you to watch that video if you haven't seen it yet. I hope you found this video helpful in getting started with mechanical keyboards. At the end of my videos, I usually say that if you have any questions, leave a comment and I'll get back to you. However, I highly encourage you to do your own research first because chances are you'll find it in some Reddit thread. If you still can't find the answer that you're looking for, then go ahead and leave a comment and I'll do my best to get back to you. Please like the video if you found it helpful and subscribe to stay updated on my future content. Until next time.